Knox narrates the plot through the eyes of Mr. Bunce. The novel begins with an introduction to some characters including Johnny Bold, Dean Arabham, Eleanor Arabham, Archdeacon Grantley and many more. Johnny Bold is placed as the protagonist, who becomes an atheist in a town where atheism is rare. This atheism is then reflected in Bold's progression into becoming a doctor, shadowing the certain Dr. Filgrave. Meanwhile, Augusta Oriel, a conscientious and religious woman, is introduced who seemingly falls ill and is then treated by Johnny Bold. Johnny then falls in love with Augusta, but is rejected by her upon confession of his love due to differing religious beliefs. He is then followed to France by Knox, where he meets Signora Vassi Neroni. Signora and Johnny are introduced to each other, and Johnny is later compelled to confess his love for her. Before Signora can respond, Johnny is called to serve an injured individual. Uddharan Chenne. Knox begins the second chapter with an introduction to two brothers, Marmaduke and Francis Thorne. Marmaduke grows eager to take upon a clerical role in one of his family-owned properties, Chaldicotes. He discusses the prospects for this with Bishop Grantley, who suggests him to take on such roles in smaller country regions first in order to gain experience. Marmaduke then meets Miss Van Sculpet, who is later invited to a gathering by Francis at Chaldicotes. Meanwhile, Marmaduke's efforts are rejected by Bishop Grantley, sparking him to see Father Shuhon. Marmaduke tells Father Shuhon about his rejection from Grantley in such a way that it seems that it was Marmaduke who rejected Bishop Grantley's offer, causing Father Shuhon to offer Marmaduke theological education for his pursuits. However, Marmaduke eventually weds Miss Van Sculpet and leaves for America, with no mention of his previous clerical ambitions again. The plot then shifts to the Gresham family at the start of the third chapter. Most importantly, Major Gresham. Major Gresham is an elected member of the Parliament. He seems to grow fond of Miss Lookaloft, to which objection is raised by Countess de Courcy, an advisor of the Greshams. This is because Miss Lookaloft founded a conservative party in Barsetshire, whereas the Countess is part of the Liberal Party. This objection yields nothing, as Major Gresham eventually gets engaged to Miss Lookaloft in private. Meanwhile, Major Gresham hosts a gathering of politicians for political reform where he is informed of his opposition resigning from their political duties, leaving Major Gresham as the new leader of the nation. However, following a motor accident in which Miss Lookaloft suffers from concussion, Major Gresham loses his seat in Parliament through election. He is then informed of Miss Lookaloft leaving the hospital upon recovery for travels of the sea as her medicine, realizing that she only courted him for his political power. This is then confirmed by Major Gresham receiving an invitation to the wedding of Miss Lookaloft to her personal escort at sea, Lord Porlock. The fourth chapter leads with the ancestry of a new character, Theophylact Crawley Grantley. Theophylact is the grandson of Archdeacon Grantley and Mr. Crawley. He takes upon a role in the clergy of Barchester. However, delivers his first sermon in the cathedral in an unorthodox manner. This sermon is twisted and turned by the media and the gossip of the people, creating controversy around Theophylact, which he takes as a positive sign of newfound religious engagement within the people of Barchester. Theophylact eventually marries Mrs. Friedenszeit, who, regardless of the controversy, applauds Theophylact for his courage in expressing himself and potentially bringing about change. He then proceeds to garner greater public notability by proposing the abolishment of the tithe, and becomes the leading choice for the next Bishop of Silverbridge. This is stalled by the onset of the war on Barchester, and the consequences of the war eventually lead to Theophylact being forced out of his position. The pilgrimage to Barchester takes place in Chapter 5. Reverend Charles Ombry and Dean Olcombe are introduced. Mr. Ombry reminds Dean Olcombe that the present year, 1925, is the 1000th death anniversary of St. Ewold. The actual date in near sight. The church of St. Ewold lied close to the middle of Barchester, causing Mr. Ombry to suggest a large religious procession in Barchester to honor this specific event. The procession took place, gathering crowds from all over the nation, and was deemed a success by the people. The people of Barchester itself, however, were indifferent to the processions as it was no more than a regular Catholic procession to them. The pilgrimage aided the economics of Barchester, but became increasingly unpopular and no more a point of interest for the people of Barsetshire as the time went on. Simultaneously, Lord Dumbello and Miss Lufton are introduced. They are entangled romantically with one another, and eventually get engaged to each other. Upon informing his mother of the engagement, Lord Dumbello realizes that due to his lack of devotion to any religious cause since a young age, there could potentially be an issue in marrying Miss Lufton. Miss Lufton had no issue with this, being a devoted Catholic herself. However, their families, the clergymen of Barchester, and some other people objected to this. This created issues in the lead up to the marriage, eventually causing the engagement to be broken off. In the final chapter, Knox introduces Mr. Septimus Arabam, who initially denies a role in the clergy only to return as the warden of Hiram's hospital. He oversees the conduction of yet another centenary celebration, albeit in a limited manner. This time the 500th death anniversary of John Hiram. The celebrations would occur at Hiram's hospital, prior to which Mr. Arabam became a married man out of the blue. This happened to discontent the people of Barchester, as the culture of the town despised the suddenness of it all, and perhaps too the secrecy. Simultaneously, Mr. Arabam was subject to great praise in the Jupiter newspaper for being a well-suited warden at the hospital. Later, a discovery is made by Dean Olcombe that Mr. Arabin's wife is a woman who has separated from her spouse due to mistreatment. This is looked down upon by the Dean. However, Mr. Easyman argues that as long as Mr. Arabin's teachings at the hospital comply with the church, it is up to the committee of the hospital themselves to decide whether or not Mr. Arabin's personal life has much of an impact on his career. However, Mr. Septimus Arabam resigns himself prior to any of the gossip being spread, as he sees no future in his teachings and feels that his position is not fitted for the way the times and people are changing. Mr. Easyman tries to argue him into reversing on his decision, but this is of no yield in the end.